The grand hall was filled with laughter, the clinking of fine crystal, and the murmurs of nobility engaging in polite conversation. The glow of countless chandeliers reflected off the golden embroidery of the guests' elaborate attire, casting intricate patterns across the polished marble floor. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, an announcement of a long-awaited union. Yet, even as I stood in the center of it all, a peculiar chill ran down my spine. Lucian, the man I had been promised to since childhood, wore a smirk as he raised his wine goblet. His striking features, once so familiar, now held a trace of something I hadn't noticed before, something almost cruel. He clinked his glass lightly with a spoon, the delicate chime silencing the room. All eyes turned toward him, expectation thick in the air. "I appreciate all of you gathering here tonight," he began, his voice smooth and confident, every syllable dripping with self-importance. "It is with a heavy heart that I must make an unexpected announcement." Murmurs flared up like sparks in dry wood. My grip on my own glass tightened, but my expression remained composed. I already knew what he was about to say. Lucian turned toward me, feigning regret, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. "Evelyn, you have been a dear companion to me. However, I cannot go through with this engagement. My heart belongs to another." Gasps rang out across the hall. Conversations broke into hushed whispers. Some guests turned to each other, their expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed amusement. I let the silence stretch before finally responding, my voice steady and cold. "I see." For the first time, Lucian hesitated, his confidence wavering. He had expected anger, maybe heartbreak, anything but my calm acceptance. "It's unfortunate," he continued, regaining his momentum, "but I know you understand. Lady Seraphina is my true love. It would be wrong to deceive you any longer." A delicate figure in a pale pink gown stepped forward. Lady Seraphina lowered her gaze demurely, as though the weight of her beauty was too much to bear. Her golden curls shimmered in the candlelight, and the soft sighs of admiration from the crowd told me that the performance was working. Lucian turned to the gathered nobles, his voice full of false sincerity. "I will, of course, take full responsibility for breaking the engagement. But I hope Evelyn will be gracious enough to step aside." I met his gaze, then let out a quiet breath. "No." The single word cut through the room like a blade. Lucian blinked. "What?" "I refuse." The hall fell into stunned silence. Even the musicians faltered, their bows hovering mid-air over their instruments. Lucian let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Evelyn, I don't think you understand. I am breaking off the engagement. You don't have a choice in this." I tilted my head slightly, studying him. "Is that what you think?" He scoffed. "That's how it works. I choose to be with Seraphina. You have to accept it." A slow smile curled at my lips. "Lucian," I murmured, savoring the moment. "Who told you that you were the groom?" His smirk faltered. Confusion flickered in his eyes. "What?" Before he could process my words, the great doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The murmurs turned into a shocked hush as a figure stepped in, his presence commanding the entire room's attention. Dressed in deep blue with silver embroidery, the man exuded an air of quiet authority. His sharp, storm-gray eyes met mine as he strode forward, the sound of his boots echoing against the marble. The nobles whispered feverishly among themselves. Recognition dawned in their expressions, spreading like ripples in a pond. Some even bowed slightly, a stark contrast to their earlier amusement at my supposed humiliation. Lucian turned toward the newcomer, and as his gaze landed on him, his face drained of all color. "My fiancé has arrived," I said smoothly, slipping my hand into the man's outstretched one. Lucian took a step back, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The scene before him, one he had so carefully orchestrated for my downfall, was crumbling right before his eyes. How delightful. Lucian's face twisted into something unreadable, his previous smugness cracking like fragile glass. The room remained deathly silent, every noble present too enthralled by the unfolding spectacle to utter a single word. Only the faint flickering of candlelight and the occasional rustle of silk broke the stillness. The man standing beside me exuded quiet authority, his presence alone commanding respect. His midnight blue attire, embroidered with silver filigree, bore the insignia of a noble house even more powerful than Lucian's. The moment he stepped forward, heads lowered, and whispers turned reverent. Lucian forced a chuckle, though it came out stiff. What is the meaning of this? I turned to him with the same unwavering calm I had maintained all evening. I told you already, Lucian. You weren't the groom. His lips parted as if to argue, but then he caught the piercing gaze of the man at my side. The realization hit him like a wave crashing against the rocks. Duke Callis. His voice was barely above a whisper, the name spilling from his lips in disbelief. Callis von Edivane, the very man now standing beside me, was the heir to one of the most influential ducal families in the kingdom. His reputation was formidable, his words carrying weight in both the royal court and the battlefield. Unlike Lucian, whose power came solely from family prestige, Callis had earned his status through skill, intelligence, and sheer strength. Lucian swallowed hard. This is a joke. There's no way. Oh. I tilted my head, my voice laced with amusement. You truly believe my family would entrust me to you? A man so easily swayed by fleeting affections. Serafina let out a soft gasp beside him, shrinking slightly as the realization dawned. She had been so confident, so sure that Lucian was making a grand statement of love by choosing her over me. But now, as the truth unraveled before them, the weight of what they had done became clear. Lucian turned to me again, his composure slipping. No, this isn't possible. Your family signed the betrothal agreement. Yes, I interjected, my voice calm, yet firm. An engagement contract was made. I took a deliberate step forward, closing the space between us. But not with you. The tension in the air thickened, nobles around us now murmuring amongst themselves, their gazes darting between Lucian and me. Callis finally spoke, his voice deep and composed. The original arrangement was made under the assumption that the Eldrick family would provide a suitable match for Lady Evelyn. However, he paused, his grey eyes regarding Lucian with quiet disdain. When it became clear that you lacked the necessary qualities, another arrangement was made. Lucian's face darkened, his fists clenching. This is absurd. My family would never. They already did, I cut in smoothly. You see, Lucian, your father knew exactly what kind of man you were. I let the words sink in, watching as the fury in his eyes flickered with something else, fear. He saw your reckless behavior, your fickle affections, and he made a choice. He withdrew your name from the contract and sought someone more capable. Lucian staggered back as if struck. He turned sharply, as if hoping to see someone, anyone, dispute my words. But his parents remained silent. His father, the Duke of Eldrick, sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw clenched, while his mother avoided his gaze altogether. Realization crashed over him in full force. They had never intended for him to be the groom. Lucian let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head. So this is why you refused. He met my gaze again, something desperate in his eyes now. You knew from the beginning. I smiled, tilting my chin up slightly. Of course. He exhaled sharply, as if the weight of his own foolishness had finally caught up to him. Then why let me humiliate myself? Callis answered before I could. Because you needed to understand. He stepped forward, his stance firm, his voice steady. Actions have consequences, Lucian. You treated Lady Evelyn as if she were disposable, as if her worth was tied solely to your favor. His gaze sharpened. Now, you will learn what it means to be discarded. Lucian flinched, his face paling. The words were a mirror reflecting his own cruelty back at him. I turned away from him, no longer interested in his downfall. Instead, I looked up at Callus, whose expression softened as he met my gaze. He extended his arm, and without hesitation, I took it. The moment my hand rested in his, the hall erupted into hushed excitement. The weight of tradition, of noble power plays, had shifted, and I had won. Lucian was left standing amidst the ruins of his own arrogance, while I walked forward, toward a future that was no longer his to claim. The murmurs in the grand hall had yet to settle, rippling through the gathered nobles like a tide that refused to recede. The weight of what had just transpired hung thick in the air, yet I did not spare Lucian another glance. His downfall had been of his own making, and I had no interest in witnessing him flounder in the wreckage of his misplaced arrogance. Instead, I allowed Callus to lead me forward, his grip on my hand firm yet composed, as if anchoring me amidst the storm of whispers. Serafina, still standing by Lucian's side, had gone rigid. Her delicate fingers clutched the folds of her gown, the very picture of a perfect, tragic heroine. But her wide blue eyes, which had once gleamed with victory, now brimmed with something else entirely. Confusion. Dread. Perhaps even a dawning horror at the realization that she had tethered herself to a man who no longer held the power he once wielded so carelessly. Lucian finally found his voice, though it carried none of the confidence he had displayed earlier. "This isn't over," he said, forcing himself to straighten. "My family still holds power. My father may have agreed to this, but he wouldn't." His words died as a heavy presence settled over the room. A new figure had entered the scene, one whose authority eclipsed even Callus's. The Duke of Eldrick himself rose from his seat at the high table, his expression carved from stone. His sharp, weathered gaze landed on Lucian, and in that single look, any lingering bravado in his son crumbled. "Enough," the Duke's voice carried across the hall, quiet yet absolute. "You have embarrassed this family enough for one evening." Lucian turned to his father, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Father, you can't." "I can." The Duke's words were final, leaving no room for argument. "And I have." His gaze flickered to me then, assessing, as if seeing me not as a discarded fiancée, but as the woman who had risen above his son's folly with grace and precision. "Lady Evelyn, the Eldrick family acknowledges its misjudgment. It seems you were far more aware of your circumstances than my son ever was." I inclined my head, maintaining the poise that had carried me through this night. It was never my place to correct his assumptions. A low murmur of approval rippled through the nobility. A woman in my position, wronged yet unyielding, had just solidified her standing in their eyes. The Duke gave a nod of understanding before turning back to his son. "You will leave quietly, Lucian. Any further disgrace tonight will not be tolerated." Lucian's entire frame went rigid. For all his flaws, he had never imagined that his own father would turn against him so publicly. He turned to Serafina then, seeking refuge in the woman for whom he had so readily thrown everything away. But Serafina, for all her beauty and grace, had always been a creature of self-preservation. And in this moment, she saw what Lucian did not: he was no longer a prize worth fighting for. Her delicate fingers loosened from his sleeve, her expression wavering with uncertainty. She took a step back. Lucian's breath hitched. "Serafina. I need to think," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is not what I expected." The final blow struck deeper than anything I could have inflicted. The woman for whom he had so willingly shattered our engagement, the woman he had held above all else, was now hesitating. Lucian had always believed himself to be the one making choices, the one in control. Now, for the first time, he understood what it meant to be discarded. The humiliation was complete. He clenched his fists but said nothing more. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the exit, each step heavy with the weight of his defeat. Serafina remained frozen in place, torn between following him and salvaging what remained of her dignity. But I no longer had any interest in either of them. Callis, ever composed, finally spoke again. "Shall we?" I looked up at him and found no mockery in his expression, only quiet understanding. He had let me handle this battle on my own terms, stepping in only when necessary. And now, with everything settled, he offered me an escape from the wreckage. I took it. As we departed the grand hall together, I did not look back. There was no need to. Lucian had long since ceased to be a part of my future. And for the first time, I walked forward with the knowledge that the life ahead of me was mine to shape. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the grand hall, the weight of the evening's events settling over me like a cloak. Though I had emerged victorious, a strange quiet lingered in my chest. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was never something I had sought out. From the moment Lucian had thrown me aside, I had accepted the end of our supposed relationship. I had simply allowed him to walk straight into his own downfall. Callis remained by my side, his presence steady and unwavering. Unlike Lucian, he did not fill the silence with unnecessary words or false assurances. He simply existed beside me, allowing the world to settle around us without intrusion. It was a quiet kind of strength, the sort that did not need to be flaunted to be felt. As we reached the carriage that awaited us, he turned to me, his storm-gray eyes unreadable in the dim light. "Are you satisfied with how things ended?" I considered his question for a long moment. Was I satisfied? Lucian's betrayal no longer held power over me, and Serafina's fleeting triumph had crumbled before her eyes. Their downfall had been their own doing, and I had merely ensured that I was not the one left in the wreckage. "Yes," I finally answered, my voice steady. "I am." He studied me for a moment longer before nodding. "Good." He extended a hand toward the carriage, an unspoken invitation. I hesitated only briefly before taking it. As I stepped inside, the reality of my new path settled over me. For years, I had been bound by an engagement I had never chosen, to a man who had never truly seen me. But now, for the first time, my future was uncertain in the best possible way. As the carriage began to move, I glanced at Callis once more. He had been a silent force throughout the night, never once treating me as a pawn in some larger game. He had waited, allowing me to carve my own path before stepping forward to stand beside me. Perhaps this engagement, unlike the last, was one worth embracing. The days following the banquet were filled with a strange sense of stillness. The storm that had erupted that night had left its mark on the noble circles, whispers and speculations threading through every gathering, yet I found myself untouched by the chaos. Lucian's disgrace had been swift and absolute. His father, unwilling to let his heir's foolishness stain the Eldrick family name further, had sent him away under the guise of military service. Whether it was meant as punishment or an opportunity for redemption, I neither knew nor cared. He was no longer my concern. Serafina, once the envy of many, had been left adrift. Whatever future she had imagined with Lucian had crumbled the moment she hesitated to stand beside him. Without his name and status to shield her, the court's favor turned fickle. Some pitied her, others delighted in watching her fall from grace, and a few still clung to the notion that she would find another powerful patron to take her under his wing. But for all her beauty and charm, she had made one fatal mistake: she had overestimated her importance in a world that only valued alliances, not fleeting passions. I heard murmurs of her attempts to reach out to Lucian, only to be met with silence. Whatever affection had once burned between them had not been strong enough to survive the reality of their circumstances. It was a fitting end to the so-called love story they had chosen over me. As for me, my days continued much the same, yet everything had shifted beneath the surface. Where once I had been merely the daughter of a powerful noble house, bound to a future not of my own making, I was now seen as something else entirely. A woman who had not only endured betrayal but had emerged from it unscathed, stronger. My engagement to Callus had solidified that perception. He was unlike Lucian in every way. Where Lucian had been quick to bask in his own imagined victories, Callus observed quietly, weighing each situation before acting. He did not speak in empty flattery, nor did he seek to control or manipulate. He treated me as his equal, never assuming I would follow his lead simply because of our betrothal. One afternoon, as we walked through the palace gardens, he spoke without preamble. "You do not have to go through with this." I turned to him, arching a brow. "Go through with what?" "This engagement," he clarified, his expression unreadable. "If you wish to dissolve it, you need only say the word." I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of hidden motives. "And what do you want?" His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile but something close. "It does not matter what I want. You were bound to Lucian without a choice. I would not see you enter another engagement unwillingly." His words settled over me like a warm breeze, unexpected yet comforting. He was giving me something no one else had: control over my own fate. I thought of all that had transpired. Of the night Lucian had so confidently cast me aside, of the way he had looked at me with mockery in his eyes. He had believed I was powerless, that I had no say in my own life. But he had been wrong. I turned back to Callus, meeting his steady gaze. "Then let this be my choice," I said firmly. "I will see this engagement through." He inclined his head, accepting my words without question. No triumph, no gloating, just quiet understanding. For the first time, I was not a discarded fiancé, not a pawn in someone else's love story. I was simply myself, standing at the beginning of a future I had chosen. And that was enough. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope.